Welcome to Insight Asia, an SEB podcast where we talk about Asian economies and financial markets. Today we are recording a Christmas special where we're trying to identify some potential Asian surprises in 2026. My name is Fredrik Hahnel. I am head of Asia for SEB. We are recording this on the 17th of December in the afternoon in Singapore, and with me, as so often, my co-pilot Sean Yokota, head of markets for Asia. How are you doing today, Sean?
Hey, Fredrik, I'm doing good. It's the monsoon season starts, and it's a bit cooler in Singapore, so it's the best time of the year.
Exactly. And we are, as I said, going to talk about some top surprises for 2026. But before we do that, we thought we should just go through some surprise predictions that we did last year, and have that as a bit of a backdrop for what we now are discussing in terms of what's going to happen in 2026. So how do we do this, Sean? Should you start by, I think we said you start by reading my predictions and then I comment on them, right?
Yes, let's have some accountability. So we'll start with what you said last year. So you had five of them. The first one was that there's going to be a Mar-a-Lago currency agreement, so that all the major currencies kind of devalue the US dollar. The second one was for the BRICS to launch its own BRICS currency. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And the third one was a EU-India to have a trade agreement signed. Fourth was a military tension over Taiwan. And then fifth was that COMEC makes a serious breakthrough. So that's the Chinese version of Boeing or Airbus. So how'd you end up, Frederick?
So did I make these predictions, really? Okay. So yeah, I think the first one, we'll just quickly go through this. The Mar-a-Lago currency agreement, no, it did not happen. What happened, of course, was that the American dollar weakened roughly 10% or so against other currencies, and the US put on tariffs of 10, sometimes 20, or up to 50% on different countries. So of course, the American competitive position in terms of trade improved a lot through this without any Mar-a-Lago currency agreement. So that did not happen. The BRICS currency, no, it did not happen either. But what happened still during 2026 was that other currencies outside the US dollars actually did kind of gain a little bit in importance, and in particular the renminbi, its usage as percentage of global payments according to SWIFT went up to 3.6% in 2025. It was 2% in 23. Also, the US dollar as a foreign reserve currency was reduced somewhat to 56% in the second half of 2025. But still, of course, the US dollar is very dominant today. And I think we've talked about this several times in our pods, that this shift to other currencies gaining in importance is going to take many years, but it's definitely moving a little bit in that direction. Trade agreement, EU India. Yes, here I think that we're very close to that. I remember exactly 1 year ago when we did this. I had just come back from New Delhi. I had met with a EU delegation when I was there and asked them, what do you think after all these years of negotiations between India and EU? What is the likelihood that some agreement is signed in 25? And they looked at me and laughed and said 0%. And I actually brought this up in our pod then and said that maybe this could be a surprise that it happens. And what happened in this year, of course, is that trade tensions and the trade war broke out, you could say, and new alliances were formed, and all of a sudden you saw European leaders going to India, starting to negotiate. And now we're very close, and most likely it will be signed, some sort of trade agreement between EU and India. There's a EU-India summit planned in New Delhi in January. But the reason this has taken so long has been, discussion points around CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which I can understand. I'd say I just came, as I said, I just came back from India, and it's absolutely horrendous, the pollution there. So I think this is, of course, something that's very important to the EU, and that's something that they're still negotiating around. The Make in India policy has been part of this. The market access for European cars, spirits, etc. In India, as well as Indian market access in pharmaceuticals. All of these have been important, discussion points and negotiation points in this. Military tensions over Taiwan. Well, there's been some. Depends on how you define it. We had Takaichi, the new prime minister in Japan, her speech in parliament saying that Chinese actions against Taiwan would pose an existential threat to Japan. And one should remember that Taiwan is, roughly 100 kilometers away from Japan's westernmost islands. So this is important, of course. There was some reactions and Chinese military aircraft radar locking on Japanese jets that Tokyo said were very dangerous. There have been U.S.-Japan military drills and a lot of flight cancellations and warnings to Chinese tourists from China to go to Japan, etc. So yeah, it's been some tensions, but maybe not to the extent that I meant when I said this last year. And then Comac, yeah, I think that Comac, China's airplane manufacturer, they have made some breakthrough. They say, I read somewhere that they themselves say that they have roughly 1,000 C919 jets in their order book and another 300 plus of the C909. They've already started using it for domestic flights, and there's only one that I could find, foreign airline, which is Air Cambodia, buying planes from Comac, and they are operating these in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Laos. So there's maybe one of the first signs of an international breakthrough, but they still lack Western certifications to open up global markets in general. But I still stand by that. I still think Comac is something to keep an eye on, and I think over time they will become a very very important and tricky competitor to Boeing and Airbus. Those were mine. So should we jump to yours, Sean?
Yes, please. Let's get this over with.
Okay. So you said your surprises would be a boom in Indian tourists in the world. Scott Bessent gets fired in Q1. EU removes the 3% deficit rule for its countries. A Russian submarine appears outside of Korea, and esports Olympics in Saudi Arabia becomes a big hit, better than the summer and winter Olympics. There you go.
Yes, I've had a lot of flops on this surprise predictions. So if we first start with the first one, so India boom in tourism. So I think I said it's more like closer to 20%. It's happening, but it's more like 11%. It's they are going abroad, but not as fast as I thought. The second one, I think this is the one I got wrong the most, is Scott Bessent getting fired in Q1 as the U.S. Treasury Secretary. And then him getting fired was a signal that Trump is just going to be purely ideological and not transactional. But Scott Bessent's really like his right hand man now. So Trump is becoming much more transactional than ideological. Third one, EU removing the 3% deficit. So there's not a direct change, but you can spend on special circumstances, such as the Ukraine war or the NATO 2% targets that they have to hit. And then the Russian sub, nothing appeared that I know of. But the funny thing I thought is that Korea is now wanting to get a nuclear sub of their own. So they have to get approval from the US government to use the nuclear fuel. And they got that approval. This is just to kind of offset North Korea, which was helping Russia fight the wars in Ukraine. And then the last one, oh yeah, actually, this is probably the worst one. The esports one, they had a 12-year contract and the entire thing got canceled. And so it doesn't say exactly why this didn't go through, but the talk is that Saudi Arabia already has like a World Cup in esports, and to do an Olympic, they had to give up a lot of their rights to the International Olympic Committee. So I don't think it worked out. Then this entire thing got slashed. Yes, a good platform to start this year's surprises.
So okay, let's see if we get closer to what happens this year. I think it's important to point out that these are not predictions; these are surprises that could happen, and a little bit an analysis around what that would mean for Asia, in particular, but also the world in general. So that's the basis for another couple of, or number three each, we have said, three each new surprises for 2026. So why don't we start with you, Sean? What's your first surprise?
Yes, so this year I'm going to talk a bit more about the domino effects or the waterfall effects of some policies or changes. So the first one, the big event next year, 2026, is that U.S. Fed Chairman Powell his term is up in end of May, and so Trump is going to assign somebody, and it looks like it's someone like Kevin Hassett. It's not confirmed, but most likely it's going to be someone very dovish who's going to print a lot of money, push up the stock market, which will be good for his November election that there is in the US. So I think the key here is that um, we never know. Fed votes by majority rule, so no matter how dovish person you get, they might not be able to change policy. But the last time there was a presidential appointee was in the 70s by Nixon. They got Arthur Burns, who slashed interest rates, and they had a massive inflation problem in the 70s. And so, if we kind of take that analogy and say this is something that happens, what's the implication on Asia? And for Asia, this is usually a positive thing if the Fed starts to print a lot of money. Usually, Asian currencies strengthen quite a bit, and a lot of hot money inflows come in. So, Asian stock markets go up, property markets go up. And not necessarily manufacturing so much, but asset prices go up, and it's usually a positive for these countries in Asia. It's just that last time this happened, it happened too much, and it ended up in the Asian financial crisis. But the initial couple of years are it's a very good thing for Asia. So that's my first surprise is that you're going to get the very dovish Fed and Asian assets boom on top of this.
What do you think of central banks in general in Asia? Because you have in Japan the central bank moving in the other direction, right? Probably increasing rates in December. And what does it look like as a general comment in Asia?
Yeah, so these things tend to be inflationary. So they have to push up interest rates to make sure inflation doesn't strengthen too much. But at the same time, then that also makes your currency stronger and it kind of even starts more inflows. So it is a little bit of a tough rock and a hard place they're going to end up being in. But yeah, it should be a good environment for Asia in this.
Great. Okay. Should I give my first surprise then?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So since I just came back from India, I thought I'd start there. And I think the kind of surprise would be that India shocks the world, because when I was there, it's so obvious. Companies are so bullish and the economy is growing so strongly. There's less worry about this 50% US tariff than one would have thought. And they just cut rates, have inflation under control, etc. So they seem to be outgrowing large parts of the world. So my prediction, or no, not prediction, my surprise would be that India shocks the world in 2026 and outgrows both Japan and Germany to become the world's third largest economy after the US and China. It's quite likely that they will outgrow Japan, or they might even have already actually, and already be the fourth largest. They've been the fifth largest up until recently, at least. But Germany seems to be, probably happening a few years later. But with the German economy being in pretty dire straits, if you would see like a contraction in Germany and a boom in India, of course, then theoretically speaking, at least, it would be possible. And I think that would shock the world, but I think it will surprise the world in any case in the next few years. And I also think when it comes to India that it will start to surprise the world quite soon with being more and more innovative. And you look at, for example, patents in India. I saw the latest number I could find. You had 100,000 patent filings in India versus 200,000 in Europe, 400,000 in the US, and 1.5 million in China. So I think it wouldn't surprise me if we also start to see some breakthroughs or surprises, for example, in artificial intelligence, where India is actually pretty strong and a lot of things happening there. It could also be that in 2026, India actually grows in terms of Swedish exports, because I'm from Sweden, right? And becomes a more important export market to Sweden than Estonia. Because if you look at the number, in spite of all the talks about India, as of today, Estonia is actually a bigger export market than India for Sweden, which gives some food for thought. You could say it's because of a lot of Swedish and European companies present with manufacturing in India. You could say that, well, India is too far away, maybe it's not going to have such a big impact. Or you could say, just imagine what a huge potential this can be. We saw China being a very important growth market for European companies for so many years, until China started to cool down. And maybe it's the same with India, because it is still only roughly a fifth of China's economy. And if it continues to grow at this speed, and it's today such a insignificant export market for Sweden, there's a lot of room for improvement there. So yeah, India shocking on the upside is my second surprise for 2026. Any comments, Sean?
I actually have something like that for surprise for India. So let me save that for the my last point.
Okay, but then we move to your second surprise then.
Yeah. So along the same theme of this domino effect, I think the one of the big theme was this big change in geopolitics, and then other one is China kind of moving up the value chain and making very high tech things that you just mentioned as well. And so, but I think the knock on effect is that other countries can copy China's model. And I think that's the surprise you're going to get is that places like Vietnam, they're going to copy China's model and start to threaten the Chinese manufacturing market. And so I think Vietnam, they made a big splash this year. The Economist in May put out a big article saying how well they're going to be doing. And so they are similar to China. They're trying to avoid a middle income trap. And instead of making very low end manufacturing and tech, they want to become a developed country. And then to do that, you got to do high end. And you have to make your own Samsung or BYD or Huawei. And so I think they're trying to do this, as well as the Trump tariffs. You can't make cheap things if you got 20% tariffs. So let's make more value added things. And so they've changed a couple of things. So first thing is that they've reformed um, the government quite a bit. So they made the civil servants a lot smaller. They fired about 100,000 people to make the approvals much faster. I think the biggest thing they did was that they had 63 provinces and they made it into 34. That's a very politically difficult. Just imagine like they told Portugal like, oh no, you have to be part of France going forward. They're not going to agree to that. But yeah, they want to make some scale, so they cut the number of provinces. They also cut some ministries, and also like if you want to do good manufacturing, you basically need three things. One is land to build your factory. Second is labor, and then third is energy to run your factory. So, like China, they're starting nuclear power plants to make cheap energy to do manufacturing. So, they're going to complete two by 2030. So, yes, I think they're making the changes government wise, and manufacturing kind of picks up, and China has somebody chasing after them, just like China is chasing after Korea or Germany or US.
And that was for Vietnam specifically, right? But isn't this something we also see in many countries in South and Southeast Asia? Uh,
I think this is different in that Vietnam is actually making changes where others are only making minor changes. So they kind of look at Thailand or Malaysia, which has been stuck in this middle income for a long time, and that's not where they want to be. And they're not doing anything much from the government's point of view. So Vietnam really stands out that they are generally making changes, kind of similar to China, to move up the value chain.
Very interesting. Because the reason I say so that other countries are also doing it is because as you and I discussed the other day as well. In India, they, for example, very recently cut the number of labor rules from, I think it was 1,400 plus to just 300, 350 or something like that. and made it much easier for small sized manufacturers to set up manufacturing in India. Specifically, it seems to, and this is approved by Modi and his party in parliament, to compete with China for this, China plus one investments. And so, but what you're saying here is, of course, that Vietnam really sticks out in their determination, and that I think is very interesting.
Yeah, and that they're the ones that's going to chase China. I can't imagine India really chase. They're going to do well, which is my other surprise, but not chasing China. I think so. China needs to watch out for somebody, and I think it's Vietnam is the one.
And also what you said on clean energy, where they have a very strong position in Vietnam. Because, for example, we also read that a lot of the big tech companies in the US are now investing in data centers in India, and India is very happy about that. But India doesn't have that access to clean energy, so it's just going to be more coal generated energy, which I think is quite worrying considering the pollution that I experienced when I was there. If I sound a little bit sick, by the way, it's because I did get sick from the pollution when I was there, so I'm struggling to recover. but very interesting. Thanks a lot for that second surprise, Sean. I jump to my second then,
Please,
which is that again a little bit food for thought. Switzerland overtakes China in terms of importance for EU exports in 2026. If you look at EU's exports to China, they actually fell last year from 223 billion to 213 billion, but they increased to Switzerland from 180 to 211. So they're very close to each other, and it may already this year happen. But if not, then the surprise would be that next year Switzerland actually becomes a bigger export market for the European Union than China. Is that as such an important news? No, but it would be the sign of something that is very, very important, I think, and that is that China's now trade surplus boomed again this year and is over $1 trillion, and it's the biggest trade surplus the world has ever seen. And China continues to increase its exports to all over the world except for the U.S. and they kind of fall in exports to the U.S. from China, which I think was roughly $100 billion or so, is kind of almost exactly the same number that it increased to Southeast Asia. So a lot of people think that it's just being rerouted through other markets into the US. So it seems like China, in a way, is unstoppable in their export machine. They manufacture over 30% of the world's goods, for example, today, physical goods. This could potentially lead to even worse and more trade frictions with the EU. We had Macron traveling to Beijing recently. A lot of leaders from Europe traveled to Beijing this year. It starts to look very much like it did in the really old times. If I go back to the early 1800s, when leaders from England went to China to talk to China and say that you have to start to buy goods from us. Here, look at all these goods that we can sell, and China just turned around and said we're not very very interested. And in those days, it was ships going from um, China to Europe, full of goods with porcelain and cloth and tea and a lot of other things that Europe wanted to buy from China. But when the same ships then went back to China from Europe, they went back pretty much empty, and this eventually led to a balance of payment crisis for England that ran out of money, and that's when they came up with this idea to grow opium in India, so that the ships would pick up the opium in India, then transport it to China. Sell it to Chinese, and the Chinese, then it was a big tragedy in China's history when a large part of the population became addicted to opium, and that later led to the opium wars in the 1830s and again then in the 1870s. So I see a little bit of a similar, not I mean it's many years ago and so many differences, but you see a similar situation in the sense that everyone starts to wonder, what does China really want to buy from us? Because we sell, we buy all these goods from China. China buys raw material, China buys semiconductors for its AI ambitions, but it doesn't buy so much else, and it's becoming I mean, Macron even warned about that when he was in China, and I see certain similarities here, and I think it's food for thought, because I think this could potentially lead to more and not less trade frictions with the EU, and it would not surprise me if over time, you mentioned earlier about Vietnam competing with China, etc. I think there will also be a risk for more frictions between China and emerging markets in the future. China, for example, I mean, the trade and the export from China to Africa is just exploding. It's mind blowing what you see at the moment. So, yeah, a lot of things to watch out for next year. But one of the kind of canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, no, I think you brought up a good point where I think there's a risk that China has some negative effects next year because it kind of reminds me of COVID as well, where like China, like this year, they did really well on this trade war. You know, they beat up Trump pretty well. They knew to not export rare earths, and Trump really backed down, so they really won this first round versus the U.S. But similar to COVID, like they did a really good job. China did a good job at the very beginning. And when we were all locked down, all my friends in China were snowboarding and having a great time. But then after when U.S. Europe started to open up, China had to lock down. So it's in the end, this is a game of an average. So yeah, I could see China doing well this year, but maybe this starts to bite back next year with tensions with the EU.
And I had lunch with the Asia CEO of Maersk the other week, the Danish logistics and shipping company Maersk, and they have these amazing numbers that they share publicly of how they see that for all, for 4 containers of goods leaving China for Europe, when they go back to pick up more goods from China, 4 out of 4, 3 of them go back empty, and only one is filled with European goods. And he said that's moving towards 1 to 5 actually now. So I think it's really becoming a challenge for Europe. But with that, let's move on to your third and final surprise for 2026, Sean.
Sure. My third one is it's about India and that how they're going to do better in manufacturing and especially in the defense industries. So first, semiconductors, you sort of touched on this, but semiconductors now have become a bit of a national security issue as well. And so this is where India is a bit further ahead of places like Vietnam, where, like you said, in Gujarat, Micron, they're not making fabs, but they're making some assembly of memory, testing, and packaging. They're doing good on that. And then Tata, they just signed a $14 billion investment kind of a MOU with Intel as well. So it's the semiconductor side is moving along pretty well. And then there was some issues with Pakistan this year. India had a military skirmish, and then they found out that their missile capability is very good, but kind of like Ukraine, trying to adapt to drone was not very good. So they started to invest quite a bit into drone technology. So like a startup in the defense industry is picking up quite a bit. So yeah, I think these are the kind of the two industries that India is doing very well in. And then tied to what you just said at the very beginning, so manufacturing has always been weak in India because of the labor laws, where when you hire more than 10, you have to do much more. It's hard to hire and fire after that. It becomes very restrictive. So now you can do that with hiring more than 10 or 100 and get manufacturing going. It's a major reform that Modi's been able to pass. So I think those kind of combination will. It's hard to get the entire manufacturing sector going, but at least in the defense industry, semiconductors, I think they can do very well and they kind of surprise the market and come up with a homegrown company that everybody recognizes here, similar to a Saab.
Interesting, and that reminds me of the short conflict we had between India and Pakistan earlier. Was it this year, right? When we saw that, because China is the biggest, the most important military equipment supplier to Pakistan, while India gets its systems from Russia, a lot from Europe, and supposedly from the US as well. And there were rumors that one of the Rafale planes manufactured by France was actually shot down by a Chinese airplane, a Chinese military airplane, and that kind of freaked people out. I haven't seen any confirmation if that was really true or not, but it was something that was discussed a lot. So yeah, military equipment and conflicts and geopolitics obviously being important thing or important aspect of doing business in the region in 2026.
Yeah. And because of the geopolitics, they've been buying a lot of weapons from Russia. And since, doing business with Russia is very tough for the Americans, it's better that they grow their own defense mechanism. And if you buy from the US, maybe Trump does something and gives you a big tariff, so it's better to be self-sufficient in this. And let's hear your third and last surprise for 2026.
This one is a little bit less. I don't really know how to formulate this one, but it's I've been reading a lot about China's biotech industry lately, and so my third surprise would be that in 2026 that's when China really shocks the world by becoming a leader in biotech. Already today, two of the largest biotech companies by market cap are Chinese. China has, like many other countries, invested a lot in the biotech industry through R&D spending. It has, excellent workforce, very well educated, etc. But there's more and more signs now that China is actually making huge progress in terms of approvals for better treatments and drugs, especially for cancer and rare diseases. So maybe my surprise would be that China comes up with a new, cancer treatment or a new medicine that is completely groundbreaking. What I find interesting with this, with biotech, is that just like in other industries, where China started to be like a manufacturing hub for low-end manufacturing. If you look at for example, consumer electronics, automotive manufacturing, and even textiles. China was for many, many years a low-cost outsourcing hub that was then, exported to other markets. But China's gradually and recently quite fast moved up the technological ladder. Quite interesting. There's a big shift, in particular in biologics and cell therapy, that China seems to be, much much faster. There are sort of comparisons made. I read McKinsey, for example, that China sort of the phase from initial animal tests to patient enrollment for clinical trials is in China between 2 and 5 times faster than in the West. The approval to start manufacturing can take 10 days in China instead of 6 months in Europe, for example. And you could, of course, wonder, is this also coming with a lot of risks? And that's for sure so, but we should not underestimate China here. And just as we were shocked with China after COVID, as you mentioned before, Sean, once during COVID, China just kept manufacturing and kept developing. And after COVID, I think everyone was super surprised with China's enormous progress in automotives, becoming such a dominant player in the EV market, manufacturing, 50% of global EVs and above, 70% of batteries today, completely dominant in solar panels, in wind power as well. They make some of the fastest trains in the world. They've been so incredibly well positioned in industries where it matters, and they are also very close to potentially taking over as the number one country in artificial intelligence ahead of the US. So I think my prediction is would be biotech and medicines in general, but I think it could also be other sectors such as the low altitude economy with drone taxis, breakthroughs there, or a new kind of deep seek moment in AI maybe. It could be humanoids, which is, if you look at Chinese social media, you see that all the time. These kind of human robots that can do different tricks and will start to serve people in different ways. There's a lot of discussions around that in China, and it's just mind blowing how innovative they actually are. And I just want to share one little episode here of when you and I were in China recently to celebrate SEB's 20 years anniversary in Shanghai, together with Jacob Wallenberg and our clients in China. On the way back from that party, that event, one of our colleagues in Shanghai and her husband drove me and a few other colleagues back to our hotel. And this was a Huawei car. Huawei is a telecom company, as we all know, right? But they are now manufacturing fantastic cars. It's not only BYD, Xiaomi, and the others. Huawei are also making cars. And this was an EV, and it was, of course, an AI-enabled EV that could, of course, speak and listen and take voice commands. And it was just fantastic, to we sat down in the car. Our colleague's husband said, look at this. I'm not going to drive the car. It's just going to drive from the hotel in the middle of this chaotic traffic in Shanghai back to your hotel. And he just sat back. He just drove all the way without any touch on the wheel. And he said, do you speak Chinese? Because unfortunately, my AI command here, it only speaks Chinese so far. But you speak Chinese, right, Fredrik? So try it. And it was called Xiao Yi. This Rob, so it was like Xiao Yi, you said, and then it answered, well, I'm here. And then I just tried it. So like, 麻烦你把窗户给开起来. Please open the window. And it opened. It could hear where I was sitting. So it opened my window. And then I said, no, don't all the way, just half the way up. And then bzzzt, it came back half the way up. I'm telling this story just to give a sense of how mind blowing it is when you visit, uh, China today, how far they have come and how fast things are happening. And I think that as a final thought, we talked about the sizes of the economy just now. I said India may overtake Japan and at some point also Germany. If you think of where Asia is moving, and you look at Goldman Sachs predictions in 2050, China and India, the economies will be bigger than the combined economies of the US and Europe. And if you combine this with all this innovation that we're seeing and these breakthroughs that I'm talking about and potential more breakthroughs that we're not expecting, I think you need to have that in mind when you make decisions on board level or CEO levels of companies today, because the world is changing so fast. And if there's something we want to share with this podcast, is of course giving a little bit of an impressions of what's going on. That's the purpose of my final prediction, which would be or not prediction, surprise, which would be the biotech breakthrough for China in 2026. Any comments, Sean, before we?
I really like your I really like your biotech surprise, because that fits with what the government wants to do with an aging population. Everybody, the cost goes up, public health costs goes up. So having cheaper medicine or treatment, I think it goes right up their alley. And when the communist government is behind you, usually whatever they're innovating, China does it very quickly, much faster than we expect. So I like that one.
And it's a nice surprise to end on, right? That something good comes out of all of this. We're all worried about China outcompeting the world in so many areas, but if they could come up with new cancer treatments or help us solve the environmental challenges they have, maybe that could be something. It's only 1 week left to Christmas. What are your plans, Sean? Are you traveling? Are you staying? What's up?
Yeah, year end, I usually go to Japan. My parents live there. And then I think I mentioned this last year. In Japan, we eat Kentucky Fried Chicken for Christmas. Um, Turkey, chicken, it's hard to find in mass. So KFC did a good job recommending marketing that Colonel Sanders sort of looks like Santa Claus if you put the right outfit on. So I'll be doing that, and then kind of going to southern Japan, and then there are hot springs there. So that's what I'll be doing. How about you, Fredrik?
Yes, I will first go to Macau to gamble. No, I'm kidding. I'm going there for a short vacation, and then we're going up to Harbin, actually, in North China, to see this ice sculpture festival that's very, very famous. And after that, we're going skiing in Yabuli, which is China's biggest ski resort, not far from the North Korean border, and very, very cool. I think it's like 50 degrees colder than in Singapore or something like that. So it's going to be a challenge. I'm going there with my family, and it's very much looking forward to that. So
Very good. Sounds fun.
yeah, I'm looking forward. I think we've come to the end of this pod. We won't summarize the predictions or the surprises for you, but we hope you enjoyed them, and we thank everyone for listening in today. We'll be back with new episodes of Inside Asia in the new year. But until then, we wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you and goodbye.